Well, thank you for joining us again for Module 10 of the Series 65-66 series from Series 7 Specialists. We're glad to be a part of your success, and we really do appreciate the things that you do to help us out as well. To visit our advertisers, click on those links, to telling your training director, to telling your even your buddies about it. We really do appreciate that. It means a lot to us. So anyway, let's go ahead and pick back up with the state law, the Uniform Securities Act, or USA. The one thing on the well, first of all, this is exactly the same material as you may have had on your 63 if you took the 63. If you're taking the 66, brand new for you. And the one thing that I want to do is always go back to basics, to those key critical concepts that we talked about at the very first of the very first module. And one of the first ones was to separate out federal law from state law. This is really important. So as you read your questions, you've got to be looking, is this federal law or is this state law? And that's why, like I say, your book, 90+% probability that it has a table that that summarizes the differences between the federal law and the state law. Spend time on that. That's a good investment of time. I know that I've said it like 3 or 4 times. I can't go over that too much. That is going to be a critical tool for you to get a passing grade. And after all, that's what all this is all about, is getting you a passing grade. So review that, use it, go back to it again and again and again. You can't spend too much time on that. Like I say, if I were a test writer, man, I could mine that little table for hours and just crank out the questions. All right, so in any event, we are talking about the state law. Look for it in your questions. Look for it in your terms that are in the question. Sometimes it won't come right out and say, under the Uniform Securities Act. Sometimes it will. But if it doesn't, if it talks about an agent, or if it talks about the administrator, or if it says in this state, then it's talking about Uniform Securities Act. So be familiar with which terminology goes with which. You know, whether it's the federal or the state terminology. Terminology is a critical thing to know. You've got to know the terms. So let's go ahead and dive into some of those terms. All right, the administrator. That's the person. Remember, even with person, we have a broad definition. The person charged with enforcing the act in this state. Man, it's so important because we've got to think small. We've got to think locally. All right, we're not. If we talk about securities that are brought to market, we're not talking about New York Stock Exchange listed securities. We're talking about Bob, who has a dry cleaner. Okay, and he needs to raise a couple $1,000,000 so that he can expand, kind of hit some economies of scale. If we're talking about the investment advisor, we're not talking about the advisors that operate over the whole country. We're talking about a little local advisor. Fred hung out his shingle. Okay? And so those types of situations, what we're talking about, think small in this state. It actually can refer to the person. In Oklahoma, it's the chairman of the Department of Securities. It could be the office, it could be the staff. So typically it is the Securities Commissioner or the Attorney General, just FYI. Very doubtful that it would be on the test. A person, I don't know how you'd get a broader definition of person than you do under federal law, but it is. So basically what we saw under federal law is that if you're incompetent, if you're a minor, if you're dead, then you're a non-person. That's about the same thing, okay? So remember to include those broker-dealers, those investment advisors, those issuers, those underwriters, those governmental entities. All of those are persons. Take that broad view. If not, you're going to miss the point of some questions. Broker-dealer, which is the business, all right? It's similar to the federal definition. They act as a broker or as a dealer on any given trade. Exclusions from the definition would include agents. Now, this is where we're going to have to define that in just a little bit. But basically, the bottom line on an agent, if I see that word, I know, first of all, we're talking state law. Second of all, we're talking about a broker-dealer environment. And thirdly, yep, there's a pulse. I'm talking about a real live individual. Notice I didn't use the word person, right? I'm talking about a natural person who is an agent. So I know those three things just first crack out of the box. And that they are excluded from the definition. Same thing with the exclusions and exemptions. Exclusions, it just does not meet the criterion of whatever it is we're looking for and talking about. An exemption, it is one of those things, but there's a certain rule or a certain set of extenuating circumstances that kicks it out. Okay? Same thing on knowing exclusions and exemptions as in the federal. So agents, issuers are excluded from the definition of a broker-dealer, and then also a bank. Now, banks, we've kind of grown accustomed to banks. No, they're not. They're not included in, they're excluded from. All right, and we're talking about, just think about First State Bank of the smallest town you can think of. All right, one branch, that's it. All right, that's going to do you well. Issuers, I worked with a company that they actually self-underwrote their own stock offering in an intrastate transaction, okay? But by definition, they were not a broker-dealer because they were an issuer and therefore excluded from the definition of a broker-dealer. Okay, now these folks are broker-dealers, no doubt about it, but they're exempt from registration as a broker-dealer in this state if they have no place of business in this state. And I just want to stop there, because the minute that broker-dealer comes in, they sign on the dotted line, man, they've got an office here. They've got to register. They're no longer exempt. It doesn't matter that they don't have any customers at all in this state. Doesn't matter. They don't have any employees domiciled here. They've got an office. They need to register. But if they have none, and the only customers are basically non-public financial institutions. Okay, let's look at these. Issuers. All right, it's a person, but it's not folks. All right. Other broker-dealers, banks, insurance companies, investment companies, that's all they deal with. Then they're not doing any what's called retail business. It's all institutional. And so therefore they are exempted, not excluded. They're a broker-dealer, but they're exempted. If they decide to open up an office here though, boom, out goes that exemption. And if they can have some retail customers, but basically just temporary residents. So snowbirds, the folks who live in Minnesota but spend their time in McAllen, Texas, okay? They go to Orlando for the winter and go back up to New York for the summer. It's just a temporary residence. Vacationers, if I'm in a different state taking vacation and I call up my broker-dealer or he calls me on my cell phone, yeah, we can do business. Even though he's not registered there, there's no violation there. Or persons pursuing educational goals, like if it's a temporary situation, then the broker-dealer does not have to register and respond to all of those little temporary things that just pop up and then they're gone. All right, the agent is the individual. We've already talked about that to a certain degree. It's an individual employed by a broker-dealer or an issuer. Remember, an issuer is not a broker-dealer by definition, but the situation I was telling you about where the issuer self-underwrote and sold those through its own employees, okay, those employees were in fact agents, right, because they worked with the issuer to sell securities. It excludes, doesn't hit the definition, those representing the issuer with regard to exempt securities or exempt transactions. Let me hit that in just a second because the last point is easy. You're excluded if all you do is file stuff, answer the phone, just administrative or clerical type functions. All right, so basically what we've got is that we have a situation where we need to describe someone who is exempt, or excluded rather, from exempt from registration. Okay, so basically it says that I'm excluded if I represent an issuer with regard to exempt securities or exempt transactions. So here's the deal, okay? There's the issuer, and there is the guy that they're talking about. The question is, does this guy have to register with the state administrator's office? Well, it depends, okay? Eventually this guy is going to take some securities and put them out into the hands of the public. And by the way, If doodling helps you out on your test, by all means do it, because they don't grade you on your scratch paper. Thank heaven I never would have passed, okay? But anyway. Okay, so what is this stuff? Okay? If this issuer is in fact the Federal Reserve Board acting on behalf of the Treasury, and these are Treasury bills, Treasury bonds, okay, then those are exempt securities. Let's say it's the school board, and they decide to sell their school bonds directly to the public. Probably never happened, but it could. These are exempt securities, exempt from registration under the Uniform Securities Act. Therefore, this guy does not have to register because he's dealing in exempt securities. All right. The classic case is, in fact, the U.S. Treasury, where the people at the Federal Reserve Board, they sell them directly to the public, but they don't have to register because they're excluded from that definition. Or exempt transactions. All right. Now here's XYZ Incorporated. There are their securities. There's a whole box of them. Okay. There we go. And they're going to sell these to the public. But what they're going to do is that they're going to go through an underwriter. This is a broker-dealer, their investment banking division, and there's somebody over here that's going to turn around and re-offer or resell these things to the public. Okay? So this is the path they're going to take. They're going to take this whole box of stuff, and they're going to sell the whole box here to the underwriter. There we go. This guy then is going to reach in the box, grab an individual piece of paper, and sell it to the public. Now, is this guy an agent? No. And the reason he's not is because this transaction right here from the issuer to the underwriter is an exempt transaction. Therefore, that guy is excluded from the definition of an agent. Does not have to register. All right? So, if we're looking at exempt securities or exempt transactions, now if this had been XYZ Incorporated, this guy would have to register because it would be neither an exempt security nor an exempt transaction. That company did their own underwriting. Those guys had to register with the state as an agent. All right. Now there's one other situation. All right, and basically we're talking about Bob and his dry cleaning company. So here's Bob's, and there is Bob right there. Okay. There's a box of securities that's it's just about half full. Okay. There we are. And so anyway, there's a new guy that comes in, and Bob says, hey, I tell you what, we need you to fill out some paperwork for us. Here's some stuff on your insurance, here's some stuff on the 401k, and oh, by the way, you've seen all of our the little plastic things we put over the dry cleaning that says Bob's Dry Cleaners, 100% employee owned? He says, yeah. You get a chance to sign up for our thrift plan. And what I'll do is that if you want to, then every week or every 2 weeks when you get paid, I'll just take some of your money, reach in this box of securities, and I'll give you some stock. Well, we'll sell it to you. And you can invest in our plan that way. What did he just do? He just solicited the purchase or sale of securities. But is he an agent? Well, first of all, who is he? He's an officer. That's probably going to be a dead giveaway because it's one of his duties of his job to do that. Now, let's say that this new employee says, good idea, I think I'll do it. Where do I sign? Does he get extra compensation? If he does, he's an agent. But remember, we said it's just part of his job to take care of the paperwork. In all probability, there's no commission that's paid. Therefore, if there's no commission that's paid, if the guy signs up, he gets paid his regular paycheck. If the guy doesn't sign up, he gets paid his regular paycheck. There's no incentive, no commission. Commission is going to blow the thing out of the water, but if there's no commission, that guy is not an agent. Now, you can see this question two ways. First of all, here's the situation. Is he an agent? Well, no, there's no commission. If he gets commission, he is. No commission, he's not. The second way, you can kind of flip it around backwards. It describes the situation to you and says, Who's most likely to do that? Well, Bob. He's an officer of the company. That's part of his job. Okay, so you can see that both ways, and watch for it both ways, because either way can show up. But that person is excluded from the definition of an agent. All right, so let's see. So we've got the agent. We have an investment advisor. Very, very comparably to the broker-dealer, the investment advisor is the business. It's a person, but it is nonetheless a business. And it's the same definition as federal. We've got the three-pronged test. First of all, do they give advice on securities? The second thing is that their business? Are they come in every day, unlock the door, and start to give advice on securities? And the third thing is, do they get paid for it? Is there compensation of some kind? Direct or indirect, whichever. Okay, so same definition as federal. Exclusions. Oh, are we surprised? Okay, the banks are exclusions. Those professionals we talked about, the LATE acronym, lawyers, accountants, teachers, and engineers, as long as it's incidental to the practice of law, the practice of accounting, etc. Broker-dealers are excluded, and that, in fact, is one of the reasons why you have to separate them in your mind, is because the one cannot be the other. All right? In the real world, you have so much spillover between the two, but they're still separate entities. All right, so broker-dealers, publishers of any type unless they give advice specific to the needs of the subscriber. That's kind of strange wording. Watch for it. Remember, this test is on law, and law is written by lawyers. And a lot of times what they'll do when they write a question, they'll just lift a phrase right off of the law. Well, this is one that you need to watch for because it's just lifted straight out of the Uniform Securities Act. If they give advice specific to needs of subscribers, then that makes them an investment newsletter, basically, that is hitting that three-point test. And then investment advisory representative, or IAR, just like the agent cannot be the broker-dealer and vice versa, the investment advisor cannot be the representative and vice versa. So the business and the individual. Exempt from registration in this state. This is an exemption. These are investment advisors, no place of business in this state. Same thing we said about the broker-dealers. You hang your shingle, boom, there you are. And your only customers are very, very comparable. Non-public financial institutions, non-retail, I guess I should say, financial institutions like other investment advisors, broker-dealers, banks, insurance, and investment companies. All right, so pretty much the same thing. Now, here's one place where we get into a difference between investment advisors and broker-dealers. If I'm a broker-dealer and I have one, count them, one, there we go, retail customer that moves to your state, I have to get registered in your state. That's it. I mean, it's just Fred, and he moved there. All right. But if I'm an investment advisor and I have one retail customer that moves to your state, I'm still okay. In fact, I have two. Yeah, still okay. All right. So up to 5. Now, we saw that that there were fewer than 15 at the federal level for a de minimis exemption. But how do I remember the state de minimis exemption? Let's see, fewer than 15 at the federal, that means 14 or less. But this gives me problems. The STATE, de minimis exemption. STATE, how am I going to remember that that's 5? I don't know. Anyway, state de minimis exemption is 5. In a rolling 12-month period, just like with the federal. And the investment advisor representative, which is the individual, all right, just like the agent is the individual, non-clerical or administrative affiliates of the investment advisor. So basically, if I'm involved in the dispensing of investment advice, those 3 activities, in any means other than just, like I say, filing, typing, greeting people, handling paper, like I say, then I am a representative. So if I make recommendations, if I give advice, obviously if I manage portfolios, if I solicit that advisory service, if I'm selling it, I'm involved in it. All right? And if I have supervisory duty over any of those advisory activities. Like I say, just the clerical or administrative, those are excluded, but if you're non-clerical, you're not just administrative, then you are in fact considered a representative. And then let's go ahead and talk about the federal covered advisor real quickly here, and then we'll take a little break before we get down to custody. So if, as an investment advisor, I have assets under management that exceed 100 million, then I become a federal covered advisor. This is measured annually, okay? And I have to register with the federal. I cannot register with the state. We talked about, well, let's go ahead and talk about the details of this. Okay, that's one of the things, the assets under management is one thing that puts me right into the federal covered advisor category. But if I advise registered investment companies, remember back when we said that the federal government, with the 1940 Investment Company Act of 1940, that they carved out specific jurisdiction over investment companies. So if I, as an investment advisor, advise in that ballpark where the federal government has specific jurisdiction, then I need to be under federal jurisdiction. I'm a federal covered advisor. I have to register with the SEC. I cannot register with the state. But Dan, I've got 20 clients. Only 2 of them are investment companies. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like the old waiter, there's a fly in my soup. You don't have soup, you've got a fly. One of them spoils the whole thing. So in any event, there's that, and then let's see, there's a federal exemption. If there's a federal exemption for the advisor, all right, then they become federal covered advisors because of the preeminence of federal law. So those advisors register with the SEC, not with the state, but the representatives, the individuals, still have to register at the state level. There is no roster for just folks at the SEC. But I got to register somewhere, so I always do it at the state if I'm just a regular individual. Now, what we've got small size advisors, less than 25 assets under management, must register at the state. Mid-size advisors, 25 up to 100 million. Okay, they typically will register at the state. If they can choose SEC registration if they're not required to register in their principal state, and if registered would not be subject to examination by that state's administrator, or this looks like something just to put a check mark by and memorize these requirements, doesn't it to you? Yeah, I think so. They have to register in 15 or more states. If those conditions are not met, then like I say, they will register with the state. So registration with the SEC at that level, it's an exception, not the rule. All right, and then other registration scenarios, pension consultant. Well, let's go ahead and do this first before we get too far away. Because I think that you can see by now that I like visuals, and so what we've got is we've got, with regard to assets under management, there's the 25 million, and this is state, period. You've got up to 100 million, and that's typically state. There are those exceptions, but then once you hit over 100 million, then with the little details we're about to say, you're going to be registering with the SEC. So you're a federal covered advisor. Okay, there's a little $10 million band on the upside that basically says, if you're right in here and you're still state registered, you're still okay. And, oh, but you know, we've got down to 90 million. If your assets go down and through here, you're still okay with the SEC registration. We don't want to have you flipping back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's not good for anybody. And so you've got that, it's a total of a $20 million band where you can still be in compliance. Okay, so let's see then, other allowed SEC registration scenarios. If I'm a pension consultant, I don't deal with any people. All I do is talk with pension accounts 200 million or over total assets that I advise on. I don't really manage any of them per se. Instead, I tell the pension administrators how to stay within their fiduciary role. I'm specifically defined as an investment advisor. Affiliated advisors of a federal registered advisor. Okay, then and also if I have the expectation of federal eligibility within about 120 days, or if I operate in 30 or more states, and internet advisors. All of those then can go for the SEC registration as a federal covered advisor. So in any event, let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back and talk about custody, and so we'll see you then in a few minutes with Module 11. Thanks so much.